Sometimes the most dangerous secrets hide behind golden gates and royal ceremonies. What happens when the world's most elite law enforcement agency discovers that a European palace isn't just home to royalty, but also the center of the largest international crime network ever uncovered? In March 2019, a routine financial investigation led Interpol agents to a shocking discovery that would turn a peaceful monarchy into an armed fortress in less than 5 minutes. The ensuing 72-hour standoff would expose corruption reaching the highest levels of government, involve 7 countries' special forces, and ultimately rewrite international law enforcement protocols forever. This is the true story of Operation Crown Fall, where diplomatic immunity met international justice, and neither side was willing to back down. What started as a simple money laundering case became the most complex international incident of the 21st century, proving that sometimes the most beautiful castles hide the darkest secrets. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun had seen many strange things during her 15 years with Interpol's Financial Crimes Division, but the numbers on her computer screen made her question everything she thought she knew about international banking. The coffee in her Lion headquarters office had gone cold hours ago as she traced digital footprints through a maze of offshore accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency exchanges that all led to one impossible destination: the Royal Palace of Valdoria, a small but wealthy European principality known for its pristine mountain lakes and centuries-old monarchy, was somehow at the center of a money laundering operation worth over 12 billion euros. Chun rubbed her tired eyes and checked the data again. Every algorithm, every cross-reference, every financial pattern analysis pointed to the same conclusion: money from drug cartels in South America, human trafficking rings in Eastern Europe, arms dealers in the Middle East, and cybercriminals from around the globe was being cleaned through an intricate network that ultimately flowed through accounts linked directly to the Valdorian royal treasury. This can't be right, she whispered to herself, but 20 years of financial investigation experience told her otherwise. The patterns were too perfect, too sophisticated to be coincidental. Someone with access to state-level resources and diplomatic immunity was orchestrating one of the largest criminal enterprises in modern history. Her secure phone buzzed. Director Antoine Moreau's voice was tense when she answered. "Chun, I need you in my office now. Bring everything you have on the Valdoria investigation." 5 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Moreau's desk, watching her superior's face grow increasingly grim as he reviewed her findings. The director's office walls were lined with commendations and photos from successful international operations, but the gravity of what they were looking at seemed to diminish every past achievement. "How confident are you in these findings?" Moreau asked, his French accent more pronounced when stressed. 97% certain. I've run the analysis 6 different ways. The financial signatures are unmistakable. Someone inside the Valdorian royal family or their inner circle is running this operation. Moreau closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, what you're suggesting could trigger an international incident. Valdoria has been a stable democracy for over 2 centuries. King Frederick and Queen Isabella are respected worldwide. Their son, Crown Prince Marcus, is engaged to the daughter of the British Prime Minister. I understand the political implications, sir, but the evidence doesn't lie. Look at pattern 7. Sarah leaned forward, pointing to a chart on her tablet. Every major deposit into the primary wash accounts corresponds exactly with known royal events, state visits, diplomatic meetings, trade negotiations. Someone with intimate knowledge of the royal calendar is timing these transfers." The director studied the data for several minutes. Outside his window, the Rhone River flowed peacefully through Lyon, carrying the evening's last light toward the Mediterranean. Soon, that same peaceful evening might be shattered by the implications of their discovery. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I track communications metadata associated with these accounts. The primary control signals are coming from inside Valdoria Palace itself, not from the capital city, not from government buildings, from the actual royal residence." Moreau's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression darkened further. "It's Brussels. The Financial Intelligence Unit has been monitoring our investigation." The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid French, but Sarah caught enough to understand that their investigation had been flagged at the highest levels of European law enforcement. When Moreau hung up, his decision was written across his face. We're moving forward. I'm authorizing a formal investigation under Article 12 of the International Criminal Court Statutes. We'll coordinate with the FBI's International Operations Division and Scotland Yard's Financial Crimes Unit. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Article 12 investigations could bypass diplomatic immunity under specific circumstances, but they required extraordinary evidence and even more extraordinary political will. What's our timeline? 48 hours to build an airtight case. If we're going to accuse European royalty of running an international criminal enterprise, we need evidence so compelling that even their own allies can't protect them. Over the next 2 days, Sarah worked with a team of 12 analysts from 5 countries. They built what would later be called the most comprehensive financial crime case in Interpol history. The evidence showed that the Valdorian money laundering network had processed criminal funds equivalent to the GDP of small nations. The operation was so sophisticated it made traditional organized crime look like amateur hour. The breakthrough came when FBI agent Marcus Rodriguez cracked the encryption on communications between the primary wash accounts and their control systems. The messages weren't just financial instructions. They were detailed operational orders for criminal activities worldwide. Drug shipment schedules, human trafficking routes, weapons delivery manifests, and even assassination contracts were being coordinated through the Royal Palace's secure communication network. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with amazement. "They're not just laundering money for criminals. They're running the entire operation. The royal family isn't just complicit, they're the command center." Sarah stared at the decrypted files displayed across multiple monitors. Order after order, each bearing digital signatures that traced back to terminals inside Valdoria Palace. The scope was breathtaking. The Valdorian royal family had transformed their diplomatic immunity and international respect into cover for a criminal empire that touched every continent. "We need physical evidence," Moreau announced during their final briefing. "Digital evidence can be challenged, disputed, dismissed as foreign interference. But if we can find the operational center, the command structure, the actual people running this network." "You're talking about raiding a royal palace," Agent Rodriguez pointed out. "That's not just an arrest operation. That's a potential act of war." "Not if we do it right," Sarah replied, studying the palace's architectural plans on her screen. Valdoria Palace isn't just a residence. It's technically sovereign territory. But under international criminal court provisions, crimes against humanity can supersede diplomatic immunity. Moreau nodded grimly. "I've been in contact with the ICC prosecutor's office. They're prepared to issue emergency warrants under the Rome Statute. But once we execute those warrants, there's no going back. The royal family will have minutes to decide whether to cooperate or resist." The plan that emerged was complex and dangerous. A joint Interpol-FBI team would serve ICC warrants for the arrest of Crown Prince Marcus, who their investigation had identified as the primary operational controller of the criminal network. The evidence showed that while King Frederick and Queen Isabella might have been aware of unusual financial activities, Prince Marcus was the one actually running day-to-day criminal operations. The prince has been using his position as trade envoy to coordinate with criminal organizations during official state visits, Sarah explained to the Joint Task Force. Every time he travels officially, massive criminal transactions follow within 72 hours. He's been hiding in plain sight. The operation was scheduled for March 15th, during the annual Valdorian Spring Festival, when the royal family would be hosting international guests at the palace. The festival would provide cover for the large international law enforcement presence required for such a sensitive operation. Agent Rodriguez would lead the tactical team, while Sarah would handle the financial evidence and digital forensics. 6 other specialists from different countries would provide technical support, translation services, and legal expertise. The entire operation would be monitored in real time by senior officials from 7 nations. "Remember," Moreau emphasized during their final briefing, "this isn't just about arresting criminals. We're potentially ending a monarchy that's existed for centuries. Every move we make will be scrutinized by history." The night before the operation, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood on her hotel balcony overlooking the Valdorian capital, watching the palace lights twinkle in the distance. Tomorrow, those peaceful lights might be replaced by flashing emergency vehicles, armed tactical teams, and international media crews broadcasting the fall of a royal dynasty to the world. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from the ICC prosecutor's office. Warrants approved. Operation Crown Fall is authorized to proceed. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the mountain air. In 12 hours, she would either be celebrating the successful dismantling of the world's largest criminal organization or watching her career end in the smoking ruins of an international incident that could destabilize European politics for decades. Either way, the Valdorian royal family's 500-year reign was about to face its greatest test. And Detective Inspector Sarah Chun was about to discover whether justice could truly triumph over centuries of royal privilege and diplomatic immunity. The clock on her phone showed 11:47 p.m. In exactly 12 hours and 13 minutes, Operation Crown Fall would begin, and nothing in the small kingdom of Valdoria would ever be the same again. The morning of March 15th dawned clear and cold over Valdoria's capital city. Sarah Chun adjusted her earpiece as she watched the royal palace through high-powered binoculars from her position in a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. The annual Spring Festival had transformed the normally quiet streets into a colorful celebration, with thousands of tourists and locals flooding the area around the palace grounds. Perfect cover. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through her comm unit. He was positioned with the tactical team at the festival's main entrance, disguised as private security for one of the visiting diplomatic delegations. Festival security is expecting extra personnel today. We blend right in. Sarah studied the palace's imposing facade through her binoculars. Built in the 16th century and extensively modernized over the decades, Valdoria Palace was both an architectural masterpiece and a fortress. Its thick stone walls, strategic positioning on a hilltop, and sophisticated modern security systems made it one of Europe's most secure royal residences. Thermal imaging shows normal movement patterns inside the palace, reported technical specialist Lisa Park from the FBI's cyber unit. Approximately 47 heat signatures, consistent with the expected number of royal family members, staff, and security personnel. Director Moreau's voice came through the secure channel from the Operations Command Center. All units, this is Control. We have final confirmation from the ICC. Warrants are active and legally binding under international law. The Valdorian government has been officially notified that ICC agents are operating within their territory. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The formal notification meant there was no turning back. Within minutes, the Valdorian royal family would know that international law enforcement was coming for them. Their reaction would determine whether Operation Crown Fall ended peacefully or erupted into an international crisis. How long before they get the official notification? Rodriguez asked. Protocol requires 30 minutes advance notice for diplomatic courtesy, Moreau replied. But their intelligence services are sophisticated. They might already know we're here. As if summoned by his words, Sarah's binoculars caught movement on the palace's main balcony. Crown Prince Marcus appeared, speaking urgently into a mobile phone while gesturing toward the festival crowds below. Even from 3 blocks away, his body language screamed alarm. Target 1 is mobile, Sarah reported, using the operational code name for Prince Marcus. He's on the main balcony, appears to be making urgent calls. Confirm visual on Target 1, Rodriguez responded. We need to move now before he disappears into the palace interior. The plan was straightforward in theory, but complex in execution. Rodriguez's team would approach the palace's main entrance using their diplomatic credentials, while Sarah and the Financial Crimes Unit would secure the digital evidence from the palace's computer systems. A secondary team would prevent any attempts to destroy evidence or flee the premises. All units, commence approach, Moreau ordered. Remember, we're executing legal warrants under international law. This is not a military operation. Sarah climbed out of the surveillance van and began walking toward the palace grounds, her heart pounding with each step. She wore the blue blazer and credentials of an ICC financial investigator, her laptop bag containing the sophisticated forensic equipment needed to extract evidence from the palace's computer networks. The festival crowds provided excellent cover as she made her way through the celebratory chaos. Families with children, elderly couples, and groups of tourists all mingled together, creating a perfect shield for law enforcement operations. Traditional Valdorian music filled the air, played by folk bands positioned throughout the palace grounds. "This is control," Moreau's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Palace security is increasing. We're seeing additional personnel taking positions around the perimeter." Sarah paused at a souvenir stand, pretending to examine postcards while actually observing the palace guards. Their positions had definitely shifted from ceremonial to tactical. Instead of standing at attention for tourist photos, they were now scanning crowds with professional intensity. "They know," Rodriguez reported from his position near the main gate. "Palace security just switched to heightened alert status. We need to move faster." "Negative," Moreau responded firmly. "We stick to legal protocols. Approach the main gate and request an audience with Crown Prince Marcus. Present the ICC warrants according to established diplomatic procedures." Sarah watched through her binoculars as Rodriguez and two other agents approached the ornate iron gates of the palace. The guards' reaction was immediate and concerning. Instead of the usual polite diplomatic courtesy, the guards stepped back and spoke rapidly into their communication devices. "Gate guards are requesting instructions from higher authority," Rodriguez reported. "They're stalling." Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the muffled conversation between the agents and palace security. The guards were professional but clearly nervous, repeatedly asking to see the warrants while delaying any decision about allowing entry. "This is taking too long," Park observed from the cyber unit. "If they're buying time to destroy digital evidence." "Control to all units," Moreau interrupted. "Valdorian Palace has just activated their emergency security protocols. We're reading increased radio traffic and movement of additional security personnel." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Emergency security protocols for a royal palace meant they were treating the ICC investigation as a potential threat to national security. The peaceful diplomatic arrest they had planned was rapidly escalating into something much more dangerous. "Rodriguez, status report," Moreau demanded. "Palace security is refusing to acknowledge the ICC warrants. They're claiming the documents need to be verified through official diplomatic channels, which could take days or weeks." "That's exactly what we expected," Sarah said into her microphone. "They're buying time to sanitize their computer systems and destroy evidence." She was right. Through her binoculars, she could see palace staff moving with urgent purpose through the main building's windows. People were carrying boxes, file folders, and computer equipment. The criminal organization they had spent months tracking was beginning its destruction protocol. "Control, this is technical unit," Park reported urgently. "We're detecting massive data deletion activities from the palace's network. They're wiping servers right now. All units, accelerate timeline," Moreau ordered. "We cannot allow evidence destruction." Rodriguez's team pressed harder at the main gate, but palace security had clearly received orders to stall indefinitely. The guards were now claiming that Crown Prince Marcus was in an important diplomatic meeting and could not be disturbed, despite the fact that Sarah could see him through her binoculars coordinating the evidence destruction personally. "This is insane," Rodriguez muttered through the comm. "We're watching them destroy evidence of international crimes while their guards lecture us about diplomatic protocol." Sarah made a decision that would later be analyzed by international law experts for years. Instead of waiting for the diplomatic stalemate to resolve, she began walking directly toward a side entrance to the palace grounds that was being used by festival caterers and staff. "Chen, what are you doing?" Moreau's voice was sharp with concern. "I'm going to stop them from destroying evidence," Sarah replied, showing her ICC credentials to a surprised catering supervisor. "Legal authority under ICC emergency provisions." The catering entrance led directly into the palace's main kitchen complex, which connected to the administrative wings where the computer systems were located. Sarah moved quickly through corridors filled with confused palace staff who were unsure how to respond to the presence of an international law enforcement officer. "Chun, you're exceeding operational parameters," Moreau warned through her earpiece. "Sir, they're destroying evidence of crimes against humanity." ICC protocols authorize emergency intervention to prevent evidence destruction. She was right, but barely. The legal authority was questionable at best. And she was walking into an international incident with nothing but a laptop bag and credentials that a foreign security service was already refusing to recognize. Sarah reached the main administrative corridor just as palace security discovered her unauthorized entry. Two guards in formal uniforms approached quickly, speaking rapid Valdorian while gesturing for her to stop. ICC financial investigator, she announced in English, holding up her credentials. I have legal authority to examine financial records under International Criminal Court warrants. The guards clearly didn't speak English well, but they understood enough to know that something unprecedented was happening. One guard spoke urgently into his radio, while the other maintained a respectful but firm blocking position. Through an open doorway, Sarah could see palace staff frantically deleting files from computer terminals. Hard drives were being removed from servers and destroyed with specialized degaussing equipment. The criminal organization's evidence destruction was happening in real time, and traditional diplomatic protocols were proving completely inadequate to stop it. This is control. Moro's voice crackled through her earpiece with barely controlled tension. Palace security has just contacted the Valdorian Ministry of Defense. They're treating this as a potential invasion of sovereign territory. Sarah felt the situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. What had started as a careful international law enforcement operation was rapidly becoming the kind of incident that could damage relationships between allied nations for decades. But she could also see computer screens being wiped clean of evidence that would prove the involvement of organized crime networks in drug trafficking, human slavery, and international terrorism. The choice between diplomatic courtesy and preventing crimes against humanity was no choice at all. Rodriguez, Chen needs backup immediately. Park reported from the cyber unit. Palace security is converging on her position. I can't get past the main gate, Rodriguez replied with frustration. They've locked down all official entrances. Sarah realized she was about to face the full security apparatus of a European royal palace armed with nothing but legal documents that the palace had already chosen not to recognize. But in her laptop bag was equipment that could preserve evidence of criminal activities that had caused immeasurable human suffering around the world. The sound of boots on marble floors indicated that palace security was mobilizing in force. In seconds, she would either successfully preserve evidence that could dismantle an international criminal empire or become the center of a diplomatic crisis that would end her career and potentially damage international law enforcement cooperation for years to come. Through the windows, she could see Rodriguez's team still arguing with guards at the main gate, while palace staff continued destroying evidence throughout the building. The annual spring festival continued cheerfully in the courtyard below, completely unaware that the peaceful celebration was taking place in the shadow of what might soon become the most significant law enforcement crisis in European history. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the computer terminals. The moment Sarah Chun connected her forensic equipment to the first palace computer terminal, alarms began blaring throughout Valdoria Palace. The sound was different from any security alarm she had ever heard. Deeper, more urgent, designed to signal an existential threat to the monarchy itself. Chun, get out of there now. Rodriguez's voice exploded through her earpiece. Palace security just activated Code Sovereign. That's their highest threat level. Through the windows, Sarah could see the festival crowds below suddenly, looking up in confusion as armed security personnel began emerging from concealed positions throughout the palace grounds. The cheerful spring festival was about to become something very different. I need 60 more seconds, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over her laptop keyboard as sophisticated recovery algorithms attempted to retrieve deleted files from the palace servers. I can see the data fragments, financial records, communication logs, operational orders. You don't have 60 seconds. Moro's voice cut through the comm channel with barely controlled panic. Valdorian military units are mobilizing. This is no longer a law enforcement operation. Sarah's equipment had successfully connected to the palace's main financial database when the door behind her burst open. Crown Prince Marcus himself strode into the room, followed by 6 armed security personnel in tactical gear. Up close, The prince looked nothing like the polished diplomat who appeared in international media. His face was flushed with anger and what might have been fear. "You will disconnect that equipment immediately," Prince Marcus commanded in perfect English, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to absolute power. "You are violating the sovereignty of Valdoria and the personal privacy of the royal family." Sarah kept her eyes on her laptop screen as terabytes of deleted financial data began reconstructing itself through her forensic programs. "Your Royal Highness, I am acting under authority of International Criminal Court warrants. These warrants supersede diplomatic immunity for crimes against humanity. Those warrants have no legal standing in Valdoria," the prince replied coldly. "Disconnect your equipment or my security personnel will do it for you." The data recovery was at 47% completion. Sarah could see fragments of communication logs detailing drug shipment schedules, arms transactions, and human trafficking routes. The evidence was more damning than even their investigation had suggested. The Valdorian royal family wasn't just laundering money for criminals, they were actively coordinating international criminal operations. "Sir," she said, looking up at Prince Marcus while her programs continued running. "The evidence on these systems documents crimes that have resulted in thousands of deaths worldwide. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms dealing to terrorist organizations. Surely you want these criminals brought to justice." Prince Marcus's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed something in his eyes that chilled her more than any threat: the complete absence of surprise or shock at her accusations. He wasn't surprised because he already knew exactly what was on those systems. "What I want," the prince said quietly, "is for foreign agents to stop interfering in Valdoria's internal affairs. What you call evidence, we call private financial records that have been taken out of context by hostile intelligence services." Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Rodriguez and his team still arguing with security at the main gate. But their voices were being drowned out by increasing radio traffic from palace security units. The situation was escalating beyond anything their operational planning had anticipated. "Your Royal Highness." Sarah tried one more diplomatic approach while her data recovery reached 63% completion. "If there's been a misunderstanding, we can resolve this through proper channels. But destroying evidence of international crimes will only make the situation worse." "The only thing that will make this situation worse," Prince Marcus replied, "is allowing foreign intelligence operatives to steal Valdorian state secrets under the pretense of criminal investigation." State secrets. Sarah realized that the prince was going to claim that all evidence of criminal activity was actually classified government information protected by national security laws. It was a clever legal strategy that could tie up international courts for years while making any prosecutions nearly impossible. Her laptop chimed softly. Data recovery was now at 78%. She could see communication records between Prince Marcus's personal accounts and known leaders of international criminal organizations. Order confirmations for drug shipments, payment authorizations for assassination contracts, coordination schedules for human trafficking operations. The scope of criminality was staggering. "Control, this is Chun," she whispered into her microphone. "I have recovered evidence linking Target 1 directly to operational command of international criminal networks. Multiple crimes against humanity documented." "Chun, Palace security just locked down all entrances," Moreau responded urgently. "Valdorian military units are surrounding the palace grounds. You need to extract immediately." Through the windows, Sarah could see that the peaceful festival had transformed into something resembling a military occupation. Armored vehicles were taking positions around the palace perimeter while uniformed soldiers began directing confused tourists away from the area. The annual spring festival was ending abruptly as thousands of people found themselves caught in the middle of an international incident. "Your equipment will be disconnected now," Prince Marcus announced, nodding to his security personnel. "Wait," Sarah said, raising her hand. "Before you do anything that can't be undone, you should know that everything I've discovered is being transmitted in real time to ICC headquarters. Destroying this equipment or interfering with my investigation will only add obstruction of justice to the existing charges." It was a bluff, but a reasonable one. Modern forensic equipment often included real-time data transmission capabilities for exactly this type of situation. Prince Marcus hesitated, clearly uncertain about the technical capabilities of her equipment. How do I know you're not simply stealing Valdorian state secrets for foreign intelligence services? The prince asked. Sarah turned her laptop screen toward him. Because these aren't state secrets, Your Highness. These are operational orders for drug cartels, payment authorizations for weapons shipments to terrorist organizations, and coordination schedules for human trafficking networks. No legitimate government conducts this type of activity. Prince Marcus stepped closer to examine the screen, and Sarah saw his expression change as he recognized specific documents and communication records. For the first time, he looked less like an outraged royal defending his sovereignty, and more like a criminal who had been caught. These records are taken out of context, he said, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. The context is quite clear, Sarah replied. Order number 7431 is a payment authorization for $50 million to the Medellin cartel for cocaine shipments through European ports. Order number 7432 is weapons delivery coordination with Syrian arms dealers. Order number 7433 is a human trafficking route schedule through Eastern Europe. The data recovery had reached 91% completion. Sarah could see years of criminal activity documented in meticulous detail, with the Valdorian royal family serving as the command center for an international criminal empire that operated under the protection of diplomatic immunity. Control, this is Chun, she whispered into her microphone. Evidence confirms that Valdoria Palace is the operational headquarters for international criminal networks worth over $50 billion annually. This goes far beyond money laundering. Chun, Valdorian Defense Ministry just declared the palace grounds a restricted military zone. Moreau responded with obvious strain. All foreign personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately or face detention as enemy agents. Enemy agents. The situation had escalated from law enforcement operation to potential international conflict. Sarah realized that the Valdorian government was prepared to treat ICC investigators as hostile foreign operatives rather than acknowledge the evidence of royal involvement in international crime. Your Royal Highness, she said carefully, declaring ICC investigators to be enemy agents will create serious complications for Valdoria's relationships with European Union partners and NATO allies. Valdoria's relationships with our allies are not your concern, Prince Marcus replied, but Sarah could see uncertainty in his expression. He was clearly receiving instructions through an earpiece, probably from advisors who understood the international implications better than he did. Data recovery reached 96% completion. Sarah could see the full scope of the criminal organization. Drug trafficking networks spanning 6 continents, arms dealing operations supplying conflicts in 12 countries, and human trafficking routes that had moved thousands of victims annually for over a decade. The Valdorian royal family had transformed their palace into the nerve center of global organized crime. Control to Chun. Moreau's voice was tight with urgency. Valdorian military has established a perimeter around the entire palace complex. No one goes in or out without permission from the defense ministry. You're effectively trapped inside. Sarah looked around the computer room, then at Prince Marcus and his security personnel. Through the windows, she could see military vehicles and armed soldiers taking positions throughout the palace grounds. The peaceful mountain kingdom had transformed into an armed fortress in less than 30 minutes. Your Royal Highness, she said quietly, we've reached the point where this situation is bigger than both of us. The evidence on these systems documents crimes that have affected millions of people worldwide. Whatever happens next will be scrutinized by international courts, media organizations, and governments around the world. Prince Marcus seemed to consider her words carefully. He was clearly receiving urgent instructions through his earpiece, while palace security reported the positions of military units throughout the complex. Data recovery reached 100% completion. Sarah's equipment had successfully retrieved and analyzed the entire criminal database. The evidence was comprehensive, undeniable, and legally admissible in international courts. Your equipment will be confiscated as foreign intelligence gathering apparatus, Prince Marcus announced finally. You will be detained pending investigation by Valdorian security services. Sarah closed her laptop and stood up slowly. Your Highness, you're making a serious mistake. Detaining ICC investigators will trigger Article 87 of the Rome Statute, cooperation obligations for member states. The international consequences will be severe. Valdoria is not a member of the International Criminal Court. Prince Marcus replied with a slight smile. We withdrew our membership 3 years ago specifically to prevent situations like this. Sarah felt her heart sink. They had missed a crucial legal detail in their operational planning. If Valdoria was not an ICC member state, the legal authority for their warrants became much more complicated. The prince was right. They were operating in a legal gray area that could be interpreted as foreign intelligence activity rather than legitimate law enforcement. Through her earpiece, she could hear Rodriguez and the other agents still trapped at the main gate, while military units continued reinforcing the palace perimeter. The annual spring festival had been completely shut down, leaving thousands of confused tourists and locals wondering why their peaceful celebration had suddenly become a military operation. Control, this is Chun, she whispered into her microphone one final time. Evidence recovery is complete, but the legal situation has become complicated. Valdoria withdrew from ICC membership. Our authority here is questionable. The implications were staggering. They had successfully documented one of the largest criminal organizations in history, but their investigation might be legally invalid. The evidence might be inadmissible in international courts, and the agents themselves might face charges for unauthorized intelligence activities on foreign soil. Prince Marcus gestured to his security personnel, who began moving forward to confiscate Sarah's equipment and place her under detention. Outside, military units continued fortifying the palace grounds while confused festival attendees were directed away from what had suddenly become a restricted military zone. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun realized that Operation Crown Fall had succeeded in uncovering massive criminal activity, but had also triggered the exact international incident they had tried to avoid. The next few hours would determine whether international law enforcement had struck a decisive blow against organized crime, or whether they had handed criminal organizations a victory that would protect them for decades to come. The detention room in Valdoria Palace was elegantly appointed with antique furniture and oil paintings of former monarchs, but the locked door and barred windows made its purpose unmistakably clear. Sarah Chun sat at a polished mahogany table, her hands folded calmly while her mind raced through legal precedents and international protocols that might resolve the crisis she had helped create. 6 hours had passed since her arrest. Through the barred windows, she could see military vehicles and armed personnel maintaining a security perimeter around the palace grounds. The annual spring festival had been canceled indefinitely, and international media crews were gathering beyond the military cordon to report on what European news outlets were calling the most serious diplomatic crisis in recent memory. Control, this is Chun, she whispered into her concealed emergency communicator, hoping the palace security sweep had missed the device hidden in her jacket lining. Requesting status update. Moro's voice came through clearly despite obvious stress. Chun, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Are you injured? Negative. I'm detained but unharmed. What's the international response? Complicated and getting worse by the hour. The European Union has formally protested Valdoria's detention of ICC personnel. The United States is demanding immediate access to the arrested agents. Germany and France are recalling their ambassadors pending resolution of the crisis. Sarah absorbed the information with growing concern. International diplomatic recalls were serious political measures that could destabilize regional relationships for years. What about the evidence? Did the data transmission succeed? That's the good news and the bad news, Moro replied grimly. We have complete copies of everything you recovered. The evidence is overwhelming and legally admissible. But Valdoria is claiming the entire investigation was unauthorized intelligence gathering by hostile foreign agencies. Through her window, Sarah could see Crown Prince Marcus on the main balcony, speaking with what appeared to be senior military officials. Even from a distance, their body language suggested urgent strategic planning rather than routine consultation. Sir, what's the Valdorian government's official position? They're claiming that royal family financial records were classified state secrets protected by national security laws. They say our investigation was a coordinated intelligence operation designed to undermine Valdorian sovereignty. Sarah understood the implications immediately. If the criminal evidence could be legally reclassified as state secrets, international courts would be unable to prosecute regardless of how damning the content might be. It was a sophisticated legal defense that could protect the royal family indefinitely. Control. That's not going to work legally. We have documented evidence of crimes against humanity. State secrecy laws can't protect criminal activity under international law. That's exactly what our legal team is arguing. But Valdoria has hired some of the world's best international lawyers. They're claiming that financial records of sovereign royal families are automatically classified regardless of content. The door to Sarah's detention room opened. Prince Marcus entered alone, his formal military dress uniform replaced by casual clothes that made him look younger and less threatening. He sat across from her at the mahogany table without ceremony. Detective Inspector Chun, I wanted to speak with you privately before this situation escalates further. Sarah studied his expression carefully. The arrogant authority from their earlier encounter had been replaced by something that might have been genuine concern. Your Highness, I'm listening. What you discovered in our computer systems, the criminal activities you documented. You need to understand that the situation is more complex than your investigation suggests. Complex how? Prince Marcus was quiet for several moments, apparently wrestling with a decision. The criminal organizations you've been tracking, they didn't choose Valdoria randomly. They selected us specifically because of our vulnerability. Sarah felt a chill of realization. Vulnerability to what? Coercion, blackmail, threats against royal family members, and innocent civilians. Prince Marcus looked directly at her. Detective Chun, my family became involved in money laundering operations because we were forced to participate. The implications were staggering. If the royal family had been coerced into criminal activity rather than choosing it voluntarily, the entire legal framework of the investigation would change fundamentally. Victims of criminal coercion couldn't be prosecuted for crimes they were forced to commit. Who coerced you? International criminal syndicates that discovered our financial vulnerabilities during the 2018 European economic crisis. Valdoria's economy was severely damaged by currency fluctuations and tourism decline. We faced potential bankruptcy. Sarah's analytical mind immediately began processing the new information. So they offered financial assistance in exchange for money laundering services? They offered much more than assistance. Prince Marcus replied grimly. They offered to prevent the complete economic collapse of Valdoria. But the price was allowing our banking systems and diplomatic immunity to be used for their operations. And if you refused? They demonstrated their capabilities by orchestrating terrorist attacks in 3 neighboring countries. They made it clear that refusing their offer would result in similar attacks within Valdoria, targeting not just the royal family, but innocent civilians. Sarah realized that the investigation had uncovered something far more complex than simple royal corruption. If the Valdorian royal family had been forced into criminal activity through economic coercion and terrorist threats, they were victims rather than perpetrators. Your Highness, why didn't you contact international law enforcement for help? Prince Marcus's expression darkened. We tried. 18 months ago, I personally met with Interpol officials in Lyon to discuss the situation. We were told that protecting royal families from economic pressure wasn't within their jurisdiction. Sarah felt her stomach drop. If the Valdorian royal family had actually sought help from international law enforcement and been refused assistance, the moral and legal implications of the current crisis became infinitely more complicated. You met with Interpol personally? Meeting record 7432, A, November 15, 2017. I met with Director Moreau and specifically discussed threats from international criminal organizations. I was told that Interpol couldn't provide protection for sovereign governments unless formal charges were filed against specific individuals. Sarah's mind raced. Director Moreau had never mentioned any previous contact with the Valdorian royal family. If Prince Marcus was telling the truth, their entire investigation had been based on incomplete information. Instead of uncovering criminal royals, they might have discovered the victims of international criminal coercion. Control, this is Chun, she whispered into her concealed communicator. I need immediate confirmation of meeting record 7432. A from November 2017 between Target 1 and Director Morrow. Morrow's voice came through her earpiece with obvious tension. Chun, maintain operational security. Don't discuss classified meeting records. Sarah felt a chill of realization. Morrow's response wasn't denial. It was confirmation that the meeting had actually occurred. The investigation had been based on incomplete information from the beginning. Your Highness, she said carefully, if what you're telling me is accurate, then our investigation has been targeting victims rather than criminals. Detective Chun, the criminal organizations that forced us into these activities are still operating worldwide. They're still trafficking humans, shipping weapons to terrorists, and distributing drugs that kill thousands of people annually. But instead of targeting them, international law enforcement is attacking the people they've been victimizing. Through her window, Sarah could see increased military activity around the palace perimeter. Additional armored vehicles were arriving, and soldiers were establishing more sophisticated defensive positions. The Valdorian government was clearly preparing for a prolonged standoff. Sir, if you're victims of criminal coercion, why are you resisting international investigation? Cooperation would help build cases against the real criminals. Prince Marcus stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the military preparations. Because the criminal organizations have made it clear that cooperation with law enforcement will result in massive civilian casualties. They've threatened to bomb schools, hospitals, and public gatherings throughout Valdoria if we assist international investigations. Sarah realized that the situation was far more complex than anyone in the international law enforcement community had understood. The Valdorian royal family wasn't just protecting themselves from prosecution, they were trying to protect their citizens from terrorist retaliation. How many people are we talking about? Valdoria's population is 1.2 million people. The terrorist threats specifically target civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, transportation systems, public events. We're not just talking about royal family members being at risk. Through her communicator, Sarah could hear urgent conversations between Moreau and other senior officials as they processed the implications of Prince Marcus's revelations. If the entire investigation had been based on misunderstanding the nature of royal family involvement, international law enforcement might be making the situation worse rather than better. Control, requesting immediate contact with the real criminal organizations identified in the financial records. We may have been targeting the wrong people. Chun, we're already moving on that. The financial evidence you recovered includes communication records with the actual operational leaders. But those leaders are located in non-cooperative countries that don't recognize international law enforcement authority. Sarah understood the impossible situation facing everyone involved. The evidence clearly documented massive criminal activities, but the people with access to that evidence might be victims of coercion rather than voluntary participants. Meanwhile, the actual criminal leaders were protected by hostile governments that wouldn't allow international law enforcement access. Your Highness, what would happen if you cooperated fully with international investigations despite the terrorist threats? Prince Marcus turned back from the window. According to the threats we've received, cooperation would result in coordinated terrorist attacks within 72 hours. Bombings of schools during class hours, attacks on hospitals during surgery schedules, destruction of public transportation during rush hour periods. And you believe these threats are credible? Detective Chun, the same organization successfully orchestrated the 2019 Madrid subway bombings, the 2020 Vienna hospital attack, and the 2021 Munich school shooting. Their capabilities are not theoretical. Sarah realized that the Valdorian royal family was trapped between international law enforcement demanding cooperation and criminal organizations threatening massive civilian casualties if they provided that cooperation. No government could reasonably choose international legal compliance over protecting 1.2 million civilians from terrorist attacks. Sir, there has to be a solution that protects civilians while still bringing criminals to justice. If there is such a solution, Detective Chun, international law enforcement has 18 months to find it. Because that's how long we've been waiting for help with this situation. Through her window, Sarah could see news helicopters circling at a distance while international media crews gathered beyond the military perimeter. The world was watching the crisis unfold, but the full complexity of the situation remained hidden from public view. "Control, this is Chun," she whispered into her communicator. "The situation is more complex than our investigation indicated. Request immediate consultation with international terrorism experts and victim protection specialists. Chun, we're coordinating with counter-terrorism agencies from 7 countries. But the Valdorian government is refusing to allow any international personnel access to the palace grounds." Sarah looked at Prince Marcus, who was listening to their conversation with obvious interest. The next few hours would determine whether the crisis could be resolved through cooperation or whether it would escalate into the kind of international incident that could destabilize European security cooperation for years. "Your Highness, would you be willing to meet directly with international law enforcement if they could guarantee protection for Valdorian civilians?" "Detective Chun, I would be willing to meet with anyone who can offer a realistic solution. But promises of protection aren't enough when criminal organizations have already demonstrated their ability to carry out massive terrorist attacks." Sarah realized that resolving the crisis would require much more than traditional law enforcement approaches. They needed a coordinated international response that could simultaneously protect civilians from terrorist threats while building legal cases against criminal organizations operating from hostile countries. The elegant detention room had become the center of negotiations that could determine the future of international crime fighting and counterterrorism cooperation. Outside, military forces maintained their defensive positions while the world watched and waited for a resolution that seemed increasingly impossible to achieve through conventional means. 72 hours after Operation Crownfall began, Sarah Chin stood in the same computer room where the crisis had started, but everything had changed. The elegant chamber now served as a secure communications center where representatives from 14 countries worked together to coordinate the most complex international law enforcement operation in modern history. Director Moreau had arrived from Lyon 12 hours earlier, accompanied by counterterrorism specialists, victim protection experts, and senior officials from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The revelation that the Valdorian royal family were victims of criminal coercion rather than willing participants had fundamentally transformed the entire operation. Status report from all units. Moreau announced into the secure communication system that connected the palace to law enforcement agencies worldwide. Agent Rodriguez, now coordinating operations from inside the palace rather than outside the gates, reviewed the situation on multiple computer screens. Counterterrorism teams have identified the actual criminal leadership structure. Primary operational command is located in 3 non-cooperative countries, 2 in Eastern Europe and 1 in South America. Sarah studied the intelligence displays that showed the true scope of the international criminal network they had uncovered. The Valdorian royal family's involvement had been just one component of a massive organization that operated across 6 continents and influenced government officials in over 30 countries. The financial evidence was even more valuable than we initially understood, she reported to the assembled international team. The communication logs include operational details for criminal activities in countries where local law enforcement had no idea these organizations existed. Crown Prince Marcus, no longer a target but a key witness, worked alongside FBI technical specialists to decode the most sophisticated aspects of the criminal communication network. The organizations that coerced us into participation have been planning expanded operations, drug trafficking into new markets, arms dealing to additional terrorist groups, human trafficking routes through countries that currently have no defenses against these activities. Through the windows, Sarah could see that the military cordon around the palace had been replaced by the largest international law enforcement coordination center ever assembled in Europe. Representatives from Interpol, FBI, Scotland Yard, German Federal Police, French National Police, and agencies from 8 other countries worked together to target the actual criminal organizations instead of their victims. Control, this is Technical Unit, reported Specialist Park from her position at the main computer terminal. We've successfully penetrated the criminal organization's primary communication network. Real-time intelligence is flowing from their operational centers. The breakthrough had come when Prince Marcus provided authentication codes that the criminal organizations had required him to use for their money laundering operations. Instead of using those codes to process criminal transactions, international law enforcement was using them to intercept criminal communications in real time. What's our operational status on the primary targets? Moreau asked, consulting reports from law enforcement agencies worldwide. Primary target Alpha, the Eastern European arms dealing network, is under surveillance by German and Polish special operations teams. They're coordinating with NATO intelligence services to prevent weapons shipments to terrorist organizations. Primary target Beta, the South American drug trafficking leadership, is being tracked by DEA and Colombian anti-narcotics forces. We have real-time location data and communication intercepts. Primary target Gamma, the Human Trafficking Coordination Center, has been located by joint operations between Italian police and Interpol human trafficking specialists. Rescue operations for trafficking victims are already in progress. Sarah felt a profound sense of vindication as she watched the operation unfold. The investigation that had started with suspicious financial patterns had ultimately exposed and targeted criminal organizations whose activities affected millions of people worldwide. Instead of creating an international incident, the crisis had fostered unprecedented cooperation between law enforcement agencies. Your Highness, she said to Prince Marcus, the coordination you've provided has been crucial to these operations. Without the authentication codes and communication access, we never could have penetrated these networks. Prince Marcus looked older than his 35 years, bearing the weight of 18 months of forced participation in activities he had desperately wanted to escape. Detective Chun, my family's involvement in these crimes was the most difficult period of our lives. But if our cooperation can help dismantle these organizations and prevent future victims, then perhaps some good can come from this nightmare. The real-time intelligence was revealing the stunning scope of criminal activities that had been hidden from international law enforcement. Drug shipments worth billions of dollars, weapons transactions supplying conflicts in multiple regions, human trafficking operations that had moved thousands of victims annually. Control, this is Rodriguez. The agent's voice came through the communication system with obvious excitement. Primary target Alpha has been successfully apprehended. German special operations secured the entire arms dealing network without casualties. We've recovered weapons shipments destined for terrorist organizations in 3 countries. The operations room erupted in subdued celebration. International law enforcement had achieved more progress against organized crime in 72 hours than they had accomplished in the previous 2 years combined. Outstanding work, Moreau replied. Status on primary target Beta? Colombian forces are in position. DEA intelligence indicates the entire drug trafficking leadership is meeting in a single location. Apprehension operation begins in 6 hours. Sarah watched the coordination between international agencies with professional admiration. The crisis had forced law enforcement organizations to overcome bureaucratic barriers and territorial disputes that had previously prevented effective cooperation against transnational crime. Detective Chun, Prince Marcus approached her workstation. I want to thank you personally. When you first confronted me in this room, I thought you were trying to destroy my family and my country. I realize now that you were trying to help us. Your Highness, I was doing my job. But I have to admit, I'm grateful that the situation led to cooperation rather than prosecution. The situation led to justice. Prince Marcus corrected. Real justice against the people who were actually responsible for these crimes. Through the secure communication system, updates continued arriving from law enforcement operations worldwide. The criminal networks that had seemed untouchable due to their international scope and sophisticated operations were being systematically dismantled through coordinated intelligence and enforcement actions. Control, this is Park, the technical specialist announced. We've identified additional criminal networks that were using similar coercion tactics against government officials in 7 other countries. Same methods, economic pressure followed by terrorist threats to ensure cooperation. The implications were staggering. The Valdorian situation wasn't unique. Criminal organizations had been using economic warfare and terrorist threats to force government cooperation in multiple countries. International law enforcement had discovered a systematic strategy that criminal organizations were using to compromise sovereign governments worldwide. Sir, Sarah said to Moreau, We need to expand this operation globally. If criminal organizations are using economic coercion and terrorist threats against government officials in multiple countries, this is bigger than just transnational crime. It's systematic international terrorism. Agreed. I'm coordinating with the United Nations Counterterrorism Office to classify these organizations as international terrorist networks rather than simple criminal enterprises. The reclassification would provide international law enforcement with enhanced authorities and resources for dealing with organizations that use terrorist tactics to compromise government officials. It would also provide victim protection services for government officials who had been coerced into criminal activities. Control. This is Rodriguez. The agent reported from his coordination station. Primary target Beta has been successfully apprehended. Colombian and DEA forces secured the entire drug trafficking leadership. We've disrupted distribution networks affecting 6 countries. Another major victory. Sarah felt the satisfaction of professional accomplishment combined with the knowledge that their work would prevent immeasurable human suffering from drug trafficking, violence, and addiction. Status on primary target Gamma. Moro requested. Italian police report successful rescue of 127 human trafficking victims. The coordination center has been completely dismantled. Rescue operations are continuing in 4 additional countries based on intelligence recovered from the network. Sarah realized that Operation Crown Fall had evolved from a financial crimes investigation into the largest international law enforcement success in recent memory. The crisis that had threatened to damage international cooperation had instead created new models for coordinating against transnational threats. Your Highness, she said to Prince Marcus, what will happen to Valdoria now? The international community knows about the coercion your family experienced, but there may still be political complications. Prince Marcus consulted with his advisors before responding. We're working with the European Union to establish new protocols for protecting sovereign governments against economic coercion and terrorist threats. Valdoria will serve as a case study for preventing similar situations in other countries. And the money laundering activities? All criminal funds will be forfeited to international victim compensation programs. The Valdorian banking system will be restructured under EU oversight to prevent future criminal access. Through the windows, Sarah could see international media crews reporting on what European news outlets were now calling the greatest international law enforcement success of the 21st century. The story had evolved from diplomatic crisis to triumph of international cooperation. Control, final status report. Moro requested as the coordinated operations reached their conclusion. All primary targets have been successfully apprehended or disrupted. Criminal networks affecting 14 countries have been dismantled. Victim rescue operations have recovered over 400 people from human trafficking. Weapons shipments to terrorist organizations have been intercepted. Drug trafficking networks worth $8 billion annually have been destroyed. Sarah looked around the computer room that had become the center of an international law enforcement revolution. The elegant chamber where she had first confronted Prince Marcus about criminal activity had transformed into the coordination center for the most successful criminal investigation in modern history. Detective Chun. Prince Marcus approached her as the operations center began shutting down. I have one final request. Your Highness, I would like you to coordinate the establishment of international protocols for protecting government officials against criminal coercion. Your investigation uncovered a threat that affects sovereign governments worldwide. Sarah realized that Operation Crown Fall had become much more than a criminal investigation. It had exposed systematic threats to international security and created new models for law enforcement cooperation. The crisis that had nearly triggered an international incident had instead launched a new era of coordinated action against transnational threats. 6 months later, Detective Inspector Sarah Chun received the International Law Enforcement Medal of Honor for her role in Operation Crown Fall. The investigation had led to the prosecution of criminal leaders in 12 countries, the rescue of over 800 human trafficking victims, and the establishment of new international protocols for protecting sovereign governments against criminal coercion. Valdoria Palace returned to its role as a peaceful royal residence and tourist destination. The annual Spring Festival resumed with enhanced security and international recognition as the site where global law enforcement had achieved its greatest victory against organized crime. Crown Prince Marcus established the Valdoria Institute for International Security, which became the world's leading center for research on criminal threats to sovereign governments. The institute's work helped protect dozens of countries from the kind of economic coercion and terrorist threats that had nearly destroyed the Valdorian monarchy. The elegant computer room where the crisis began was converted into a memorial honoring victims of international crime, with special recognition for government officials who had been forced into criminal activities through coercion and threats. The memorial served as a reminder that justice requires understanding the difference between criminals who choose evil and victims who are forced into impossible situations. Operation Crown Fall proved that international law enforcement could achieve extraordinary results when agencies overcame territorial disputes and bureaucratic barriers to focus on protecting innocent people from transnational threats. The investigation that had started with suspicious financial patterns ultimately saved thousands of lives and created new models for international cooperation that continued protecting people for years to come.